Hi West Hanover, this is Mr. Neff here, and today we are learning about where people live and work. In other words, the human characteristics of places and regions. Our lesson essential question for today is how are the human characteristics different in each region? So we're going to examine the United States and how geographers may group the United States based on different human characteristics of different places and regions in our country. Regions can be based on physical features such as mountains or deserts, landforms, even the climate of a place, or even the vegetation that grows in a place. But people can define a region by using just about any feature. Because the United States is such a large country with so many differences, some states actually can have different kinds of regions even in their own state. So the regions of the United States, a lot of times we group or talk about where somebody is from based on what's called their relative location. And their relative location would be about relatively where they're located in the United States. For instance, Pennsylvania can be found in the upper right-hand part of the United States. That means in the northeastern part. So oftentimes Pennsylvania and the surrounding states like New York, Maryland, Delaware, those states can all be grouped as being part of the northeast part of the United States. In that relative location, we share basically a similar climate, similar vegetation. So we have the same relative location. There are basically four main relative locations in the United States: the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, and the West. So the West would include states like California, Arizona, Nevada. They have a similar climate, they have a similar vegetation. The South would include places like Texas, Georgia, Louisiana, and Florida. The climate's going to be a little bit hotter, the vegetation's going to be a little bit different because it's a different kind of climate. And the last region based on relative location would be the Midwest. And the Midwest would include states like Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, the Dakotas, even Iowa, and their climate is a little bit different from the other three. Their vegetation is a little bit different from the other three. So people will classify the United States based on their relative location, those four main regions. Because they're going to have similar climates, landforms, and vegetation regions, the people who live there often earn a living in the same ways that other people in that region do. They may share a history and they may share a similar culture as well. Regions can also be based, though, upon people's activities. That's what they do, how they earn a living, what they do for recreation. For instance, one kind of region that's based on patterns of human activity is called a political region. In a political region, most people share a similar government. So, for instance, nations, states, counties, even cities can all be based on political regions because they're ruled by a particular government. So the United States is a political region, but each state is also a political region. They have well-developed or developed boundaries from their neighboring groups and neighboring political parties. Another kind of region that's based on people patterns or people activities is an economic region. Economic regions are based on the work that people do and the products that they make. In agricultural regions, most people are going to be farmers and earn a living working on a farm or on a ranch. In manufacturing regions, most people are going to work in something that's manufacturing. They might work in a factory. In Pennsylvania here, we kind of have both a farming area and a manufacturing area where there's a lot of farms that are in our area. People earn a living in growing and cultivating food, selling that food, harvesting that food, preparing that food. But we also have a lot of factories where people are going to make their livings by designing and building different things. The third region that's based on human activities is called a cultural region. In a cultural region, this region is based on culture. It's the main group of people who live there all share similar customs and beliefs. It could be the religious beliefs of those people, or it could be just the customs that have been passed down from generation to generation. So that's what's known as a cultural region. So We have, again, political regions, economic regions, and cultural regions, but there's one more, and that's called a population region. And that's based on a region's population, how many people live in that particular area. Today, about 3/4 of the people that live in the United States live in what's called an urban area. An urban area would be known as like cities. They're large regions where they have high populations, not a lot of land. People are kind of living close by each other. That's called an urban area. Almost every large city has what's called suburbs. Those are smaller cities and towns that are around that large area. So, for instance, West Hanover is kind of a suburb of Harrisburg. Lingelstown is kind of a suburb of Harrisburg. So Harrisburg is a metropolitan area. People who live in those suburbs might work in a larger city, but they might transport themselves to the larger city and then drive home after suburbs. Other people live in what's called rural areas. Rural areas are kind of country areas where there's not a lot of people that are close by. People are more spread out. Those are called rural areas. So those are the four main regions that we group people by based on human activities. Next, we're going to talk about patterns of settlement. Different factors influence where people want to settle. For instance, landforms, bodies of water, climate are usually three of the biggest factors that are going to influence where somebody lives. For instance, if you live by a landform like a mountain, there's not going to be too many people that are going to settle on top of the mountain. It's tough to get to. There's not going to be much nearby that you can do, stores that you can visit. So that's one thing that's going to influence where people settle. The other is climate. Not many people tend to settle in areas that are very, very hot and dry, like a desert, or very, very cold, like a tundra. So climate will influence where people settle also. And the third, bodies of water. Traditionally, over hundreds of years, people have always settled near or close by bodies of water because they offer fresh drinking water, they offer transportation routes. So those are reasons why people have always kind of tended to settle near large bodies of water. The next thing we're going to look at are types of settlements. Settlements of many sizes can be found in the United States and around the world. Some are made up of single houses, scattered far apart across the landscape. Others are clusters of houses that are neatly arranged into villages or towns, and still others are crowded cities. About half of all the people in the world live in cities. So think about that. I mean, there are over 7 billion people that live in this world, and over half of them live in cities. So we know that a lot of people tend to settle around cities. The cities are the largest and the most crowded type of settlement. Together, a large city and its surrounding suburbs, so like Harrisburg and Lingelstown, they are together known as a metropolitan area. So New York City and its surrounding areas of like Union City and Hoboken, those would all be called or known as the metropolitan area of New York City. Some metropolitan areas are so large that they actually can stretch from one state to the next. For instance, the New York City metropolitan area isn't just located in New York. It's so big that it actually stretches into parts of New Jersey. Settlements can also differ in how they are arranged and how they are used. The way settlements are arranged often depends on the background of the people who settle there or the leaders who plan the community. For example, many communities in the Northeast are built around a town square. The lights went off. It's late here at West Hanover. You could tell it got really dark. Around, what was I saying, a town square or a common, because that was brought with them in their culture from the European countries that they moved in from. Many early settlers there were from like England or Germany, where it was very common to have a town square. So if you look at New York City, the way that city was planned was around Central Park, where a lot of the streets are built around that, and they kind of go vertically or horizontally. They interchange and crisscross with each other. The location of American cities. In the 1700s, most people in our country lived in what was rural regions. They wanted to live where they could spread out, where they could farm. But at that time, there were only 24 cities in the whole country. The biggest of these were port cities, which were located along the Atlantic Ocean. Over time, though, new cities started to develop, especially further inland, away from the ocean. Many grew up along the Mississippi River, so we had a lot of cities that started to spring up around the Mississippi River or along the Great Lakes. Other cities developed along railroad lines that were being built in the 1800s, which helped connect different parts of the countries. New cities also developed later on then along the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the Pacific Ocean. Improvements in things like technology, like farm machinery, new methods of farming, the growth of manufacturing and factory work encouraged people to move to cities. So, for example, when Henry Ford developed the Ford automobile, many people started to leave their rural homes and move to Detroit, which was where Ford Motors was located. So it encouraged people to move to cities where they could find work. Other factors that have also caused population to move from one area to the other include the importance of an industry and changes and how people may leave a place to get a job with a growing industry. For example, when oil was discovered in Texas, a lot of people started to move across the country to Texas to work in the oil industry. In Pennsylvania, fracking for natural gas has become a major industry. So a lot of people have moved to our area to work in the natural gas industry. Today, most of the largest cities in the United States continue to be found near a coast, along rivers, or the shores of the Great Lakes or other major transportation routes. In fact, the 5 largest cities in our country, New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, and Philadelphia, are all located within just 50 miles of a coast or one of the Great Lakes. Location also played a role in the selection of some cities as capitals. Oftentimes these cities were chosen because they were located near the central part of a state or country. Some state capitals were chosen because they were among the largest cities in their states or were located near the coast or another major transportation route. At the time the site of our nation's capital was chosen, there were only 13 states. The capital, Washington, D.C., was built about halfway between the northernmost and the southernmost state. So that is some information about human patterns of settlement, where people live and where they work, and how we classify regions based on all of those factors. Thanks for joining me, and I hope that you learned something about human characteristics and patterns of settlement.